speaker for tonight is Cecile Guedote Alvarez, and she is one of the foremost um, producers and directors in the Philippine theater. And she is a self-exile here in the United States. I don't know whether Cecile remembers this, but I first met her when she came back from graduate school in the Philippines, wanting to establish National Philippine Theater Association. I guess I was a little in awe of theater and all of those activities that was enough to make me back out. But since then, I had seen how she had developed this national theater group into an institution in the country, and saw how much good it had done. It's still going on right now, and they have penetrated the rural areas as well as the urban area. Here in New York, Cecile is established the Third World Institute of Theater Art Studies out of the La Mama Theater. And the programs in this theater art studies are designed to foster a partnership between the developing nations of Asia, Africa, and South America, and ethnic minority artists in more developed countries, which is something that we really need. Also, she has established the international arm of the Philippine Educational Theater Association, known as the Philippine Educational Theater Arts League, out of New York. In addition to that, she is also in charge of the folk arts for communication and education, and works with the United Nations programs. And she was also very active during the International Year of the Child. So without continuing this long introduction, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present Ms. Cecile Guedote Alvarez.
Excuse me, I'll just take a little glass of water. Thank you, Jane, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It has been exactly 20 years since I finished college in 1962 with a twin degree of Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science in Education, just about ready to go into the College of Law, hoping for a career in public service, when I got detoured and somehow just found myself fully involved in the arts. It was to the great dismay of my mother, who always thought that artists would always be starving. She wasn't far from it. We have been struggling, but we have been surviving. Basically, you don't have a woman giving you some clues about her age, but I suppose I must tell you the truth, because it has really been about 20 years now that I have engaged myself in a work in the arts. It's divided into 2 decades, I'd say. The first 10 years was devoted to developing theater in the Philippines. To some of you who don't know much about the Philippines, briefly, it's composed of 7,100 islands. It's now having a population of about 50 million, and there are about 87 existing languages and dialects. Just like any developing country, we do have a very rich natural resources. We have a large manpower capabilities, but there is also pervasive poverty. There's widespread malnutrition, high inflation and unemployment, and a large foreign debt. Our people are basically Indo-Malayan in stock, but we went through 350 years of Spanish domination, 50 years of American colonization and 3 years of Japanese occupation before we were able to restore a democratic government in the Philippines. But unfortunately, as you know, since 1972, it has been subverted and transformed into a dictatorship with the imposition of martial rule. The last 10 years have been spent in exile abroad, mainly working in America, a highly organized, urban, and technologically advanced society, working with ethnic minorities in New York, where third world peoples make up the vast working class. It is an involvement that is committed to building an intercultural partnership between developed and developing countries in applying their respective indigenous artistic traditions as a dynamic vehicle for promoting national identity and global consciousness of the interdependence of peoples. It is an involvement that began not so much out of an academic study or theoretical analysis, but it grew out of a period of development in my life from a direct experience of perceiving the power of theater as an effective tool for education and realizing its immense value in the development of the total being, in the forming of character and the preserving of broad human values, which, like religion, can cement a society together. As a young student of 16, I have been deeply impressed with the enormous instructional benefits afforded by the theater. Working as a volunteer with priests and nuns, I had to do some work with the orthopedic hospital. We were going to do a play with the patients, and I was charged to coach one of the patients. She was crippled, very young. She was in crutches, and she was to play Laura in The Glass Menagerie. She would have been perfect for Laura, but offhand, you would say as a director that she was impossible because, first of all, she was totally withdrawn. She was like in a shell of her own. Her head was always bent. Her eyes were downcast. And if she stared at you, it was flashing with bitterness and with anger. She wouldn't communicate. Her voice was hardly, audible. And her hands were always trembling and sweaty. But somehow, through a process of workshops, of rehearsals, of some creative artistic exercises, it became a discovery. It became a way of blowing off steam. It became an adventure. And gradually, but steadily, she actually developed confidence, physical and emotional control. She started concentrating, observing, talking, expressing some ideas. She had really metamorphosed into a happy person with a healthy frame of mind for learning. She knew the lines. She emoted very well. She was beautiful on stage, and she actually, after the performance, was graciously responding to the cheers of the audience. She was shaking hands, she was giggling, her voice was ringing out to the back of the hall. It was a great experience. There was summer of 1962. It's an image that cannot be erased from my mind. Her participation undeniably led to her personality development and social adjustment. For me and others who witnessed this magical transformation, the joy was exhilarating. It was like perhaps that experienced by people digging with great difficulty, with a lot of sacrifice, for a long time, and suddenly they discover an oil well or a gold mine. For after all, we were able to unleash a creative power that I think was useful to herself and eventually to society. Then again, sometime about 2 years later, still as a teenager, my involvement was deepened when I was thrust with the task of producing and directing a live TV drama series, which we called Teenagers. It was by, for, and with teenagers. I was working with a priest, Father Reuter, and all of a sudden, Channel 11 gave him an extra time, public service time, and he couldn't bilocate, and he said, Cecile, here is free time on television. We should do something about it. We shouldn't waste it. And that was the time, 1962, when juvenile delinquency was rampant. It was hitting the newspapers. Everything was like made or copied after or patterned after James Dean, Rebel Without a Cause. Our television stations were filled with canned, films from abroad, or whatever was being done was copied or imitations of, some of these themes. And so it was one of the first live drama series. It was on public service time. There was no budget. But the drama episode done by some of the young people we gathered from both public and private schools became a most effective means of influencing thought, and it served as an arena for social action where affinities to the past were established and present problems and future goals of the youth were discussed. I saw weekly how participants' minds were inspired to be resourceful, opening up to new vistas, finding exciting alternative solutions to problems. Having no money, everybody had to be involved. Everybody contributed their time and energy, and somehow everyone became self-reliant and determined to put up this show week after week for 2 years, every Sunday, live. Props gathered from their houses, banana trees cut from the fields, from the streets, anything picked up. It was just pure resourcefulness and creativity. The scripts were written by them, and it touched on any subject which they felt was necessary to probe. It dealt with dope addiction, teenage pregnancy, cheating in schools, family relationships, and also projected very good values about friendships and other concerns. The series provided its power came from the fact that it gave emotional power of identification and the liberating effect of carrying the youth beyond identification to understanding. It also gave an opportunity of merging individual lives and consciousness with the whole, of sharing experience with others and linking their destiny with the past and the future. We had lots of fan mail. Parents, teachers, school administrators, the youth were all sending us letters, giving in their suggestions, visiting us in the studio, telephoning us. There was an incredible participation that it evoked from the people who were watching the show. Somehow, the series offered the actor and audience a means for understanding the nature of conflicts in our world and for conceiving for themselves a changed reality by recognizing the existing reality. It was, to the best of my mind, a very good mirror for themselves to join the images of who they are and who they have been and who they will be. This experience totally convinced me of the need for a national design to make theater available to every citizen in my country. Young and old should have the opportunity, should have the right to play this kind of play, a play of the mind, a play of the spirit, a play of imagination, so that it can help them affect, change, or even transform society in a manner that would provide a dignified existence for all. Studying abroad afterwards and away from home for about 2 years, I gained even a deeper awareness of myself, my people, and the world. I came to feel, though, the pain of being virtually ignorant of my own culture while being quite conversant with Western culture. I knew I was raised in singing Baba Black Sheep, Jack and Jill, but I was not at all acquainted with the beautiful songs of our tribal people or our Muslim people, their songs of joy, their songs of lament, their lullabies. This was absent in my consciousness. But somehow, being abroad, it was a time for rediscovering my Asian roots and stripping myself of homegrown prejudices as I began to appreciate the arts and theater across national, ideological, and religious barriers. Through travels to different countries and exposure to international theater traditions in conferences and in dialogue with other nationalities, I knew then profoundly how artists are indeed the logical facilitators of people-to-people exchange, how artists could bring people together in a ritual of recognition, sharing our common humanity and accepting and respecting our differences. I was fortunate to have been able to study in that part of the States at the Dallas Theater Center in the South, where I could relate to a number of blacks and Chicanos in the community while having a number of Asian student friends. History has made the American people a unique blend of cultures. Its composite ethnic population and numerous immigrants have links to all countries in the world. My stay in the United States gave me the environment and perspective to write a prospectus for a Philippine national theater that would strike a creative balance between art as national and international expression. It made me see theater and the arts as a forum for celebration, for expression of the origin, development, and destiny of every people's cultural heritage, through which all can claim their rightful place in our planet Earth. And in one of my side visit to Mexico, being very near to Dallas, I saw how Indians in a nearby pueblo were convinced to be vaccinated after watching a puppet show that dealt with health concerns. Right then and then, I had become hopelessly passionate in my concern that indigenous cultures constituted a major investment to peace and a rich resource for enhancing the common life of people. And of even greater importance, it constituted a crucial component for energizing development programs at the grassroots. It is clear then that the task of national development does not rest solely on programs that seek economic growth. Effective nation building also rests upon the full development of people through the arts, a people's creativity. This is the greatest resource of a country. Their self-confidence, their initiative, their inner power to release ideas, the freedom to express these ideas and to realize cherished visions of a meaningful and fulfilled life. This must be part and parcel of programs toward building a strong nation, and thus contribute to creating one world where all people may live in freedom, justice, equality, and peace. The development process must take into account the liberation of people from the shackles of conservative practices and the transformation of their national spirit and aspirations. This is particularly essential in the Third World, where the common characteristics of people in traditional villages is resignation to the will of the Supreme Being, absolute subjection to fate decided by unpredictable outside forces, and an utter dependence on blind control by the government. Moreover, the historical colonial past of developing countries has generated a common identity crisis which reduces the soul to impotency and sterility. Their educational systems and social structures still suffer from both an unconscious and conscious perpetuation of a superimposed matrix of values borrowed from imported cultures. This has indirectly resulted in an average relative lack, not only of a total awareness of real-life conditions, but also of an honestly felt sense of commitment to uplift one's own life and those of one's fellows. Thus, there is a general displacement or disorientation of human resources, which should have been tapped and mobilized to answer basic needs related to the people's well-being and development. The brutalizing facts of one's existence must be exposed to general awareness to elicit a positive desire for a different reality and an energy to effect change in one's community life. To enter into this is nothing less than to claim one's identity. In the developed countries, the ethnic minorities, which have become an indispensable component in its economic life, encounter complex social problems that are parallel, if not identical, to the socio-cultural dilemma encountered in developing countries. The lack of relevant educational opportunities, identity crisis, family disorientation, adequate housing, unemployment, nutrition, child care, the status of women, and many others are socially interconnected problems which could only be addressed through a process of cultural understanding. By allowing ethnic minorities to strengthen their cultural bonds, looking into their roots and historical origins, they can draw from the mainspring of spiritual resources to grow in the capacity to build and develop their own lifestyles and traditions within the context of American or European freedom and diversity. This process of cultural understanding provides the key to overcoming many common problems and introducing a change of attitude that can elicit or generate full participation in the total development effort. In spite of the availability in past years of huge amounts of money, time, and energy for development programs in third world regions, the projected desired results have been far from achieved. A major failure to come to terms with pressures related to development goals is not only due to unjust systems and misdirected political policies, but it can also be traced to an inability to handle them within a broad outlook of respect and concern for the total gamut of social attitudes and human values within the respective cultural setting and work experience of countries. The effectiveness of a total cultural approach in communicating to the people the basic issues and ideas on development needs lies in its immediacy to offer them the opportunities for understanding the problem within the context of their own culture and resolving it within that same context. Within every culture, there is a strain of positive elements which, when understood anew, provides the needed motivation for responsibility in all aspects of life. A bold, creative, and imaginative approach to development should include the application of a country's folk arts and mass media resources as an educational tool of accelerating social change. The arts can move people to actual understanding of what the world is, what it ought to be, preaching virtue, feeling, and a natural sense of self in the world. Theater arts, through intellectual insights and emotional excitation, can lead man to recognize his ability to shape his own destiny with the freedom to act meaningfully, and in acting, the capability to transform substantially the texture and tone of contemporary life. The development of creativity through the arts involves having goals, objectives, commitments, dreams, an inner vision, a truth which one passionately and indefatigably pursues. It means joyfully learning to be sensitive to one's inner self and therefore being sensitive to others. Inevitably, it involves a sensitivity to the universal human condition that binds all men. The communal sense of purpose encouraged by creative participation could go so far beyond parochial interests to building a national spirit and eventually embracing the whole community of mankind. Along these lines, our energies have been geared first to developing a national model, animating many activities in the Philippines as a way of contributing to a third world cultural movement, and simultaneously spearheading an international network of folklorists, artists, communicators, and educators whose expertise and resources could be harnessed as partners for development. In 1967, we organized the Philippine Educational Theater Association to foster the health of theater arts so that they could become an integral part of the life of all Filipinos. The direction of the theater was set not for a coterie or the elite, but for the masses. Theater that drew meaning and power from the lives of the people, speaking in the language of the people. It was urgent to withdraw from the narrow vision of imported and borrowed culture and the false attitudes attached to theater as personal exhibitionism and social frivolity. We had to focus on its educational values. At that time, most of the theaters presented were imports from Broadway, any of the Western plays, those packaged in the Samuel French catalogs, and most of them done in English by some of the private schools, and rarely were plays being done in public schools. So there was a need, a tremendous need, to have or to provide varied and relevant experiences to different sorts of groups of different age levels, embracing not only the capital city, but all the provinces, towns, cities, and barrios. As a national theater, its concern was to develop and encourage artists to take our own culture seriously, to ask playwrights to draw from the wealth of indigenous folklore, legends, and history, and to focus upon this with the challenges of the times. This required artists to understand these resources, to teach from them, to improve upon them, providing a knowledge and insight into the region's temper, tradition, figures of speech, historical trends, and future possibilities. How did we go about it? There wasn't any money. We had to depend on the commitment of young people, and the key was training. We developed a training ground for young people, trained them in all the media in terms of arts, music, dance, drama, and also tried to do a number of research into our indigenous cultures. And in training them, build a production company that would set standards in performing pieces that were meaningful to our people. We evolved the Kalinangan Ensemble, and we also opened up an open-air theater in the fort. A lot of times theater was associated with curtains platforms, doors, people coming in high heels, all dressed up. And this was not a way to build a people's theater. We had to expose people to the fact that theater is any space as long as you fill it up with ideas. We could be in a church plaza, we could be under a tree, we could be in the streets. What was important was that we were communicating to our people and expressing their feelings, their thoughts, their aspirations, and letting them reflect on their problems and their needs. So the other possibility of sustaining the program was to work in media. We evolved a television drama series, like what we had done before I had left for studies. We called it Balintatao. It was a dramatic anthology that could bring into the consciousness of the people a number of Philippine short stories, dramatic episodes from contemporary life, from history, things that were relevant really to their own life and conditions. But what was most important for us was our outreach to the communities, to the barrios. There was a network of theater arts programs that we initiated and developed for enriching curriculum and enhancing educational techniques for community development of creative human resources. After training people, we designed programs to improve on rural workers and farmers, promote health and family planning, rehabilitate prisoners, provide specialized workshops for out-of-school youth, for adult literacy, for the mentally retarded and the physically handicapped, and to contribute to the integration of ethnic cultural minorities. It was a whole new kind of teaching and group work leadership technique. It gave a sense of what drama can do with and for people, a new way of reaching people with relevant ideas and problems, a basis for creating improvised dramas which illuminate social, political, economic, and moral issues, and a vehicle for generating discussion and positive action. The creative training processes were designed to educate the Filipino people into thinking and feeling as responsible and responsive citizens, equipped for survival in a challenging and changing world. And so we would have to work with a number of community-based organizations, like the Philippine Rural Reconstruction Movement. We tried to train rural workers so that they could use creative theater techniques to mobilize the community to focus on certain issues. Not so much in a banking method where you come in and you dictate to them what should be done, but rather in a participatory way where as facilitators, the artists or the rural workers could come in and draw the opinions of the people about what were their priority needs, what were the real problems, how did they feel they could respond to these problems. And it was a theater then that meant something to them and could energize development programs within the community. Besides using theater for development purposes, we also used it as an instrument for international understanding. We hoped that our movement was geared to serve as an avenue to facilitate bridges of goodwill with the rest of the world, particularly in the absence of diplomatic arrangements or where political negotiations remain unsuccessful. At that time, we had no cultural contacts or no political relations with Eastern Europe. And so we endeavored to bring in guest artists from Czechoslovakia, from the German Democratic Republic, from Poland, and it was a way for the Filipinos to see these artists, these people from the so-called communist bloc. They thought they were different. I mean, some people really, if you talk to them, having had no relationship with them, thought that they were any different. But the arts was a way, again, for us to perceive a common humanity with these people. Another kind of exercise in terms of the arts of dealing with problems or racial issues, we had invited a Korean artist to work with our company. Basically, because of the Japanese occupation, where there were a number of Korean soldiers with the Japanese army, there was some kind of a negative feeling, not just with the Japanese, but with the Koreans. Also within our communities, there was some kind of bias with the Chinese population. But in creating this piece, we precisely drew on Chinese artists into training with us, and some of our artists go into Asia and have some exchanges with them. Because for us, as a country located in Asia, we had felt a great and deep need to relate to our Asian brothers. And we felt that culturally this could be at once done in perhaps a better way or hand in hand with other political methods such as the organization of ASEAN and other kind of political movements or institutions. And as we were working in this level, we felt a greater need to reach out and link our activities to other cultural groups in the developing countries, to link ourselves, to interact and correspond and grow with the dynamism of other nations in the third world. And we found the forum in the International Theatre Institute, and we proposed and hosted the first Third World Theatre Festival. Strangely enough, at first, when we were proposing this festival, most of the festivals were being held in Europe and some in America. People said, where, how, how is it going to be done? They couldn't think that a country as small as the Philippines, or with such a limited economy compared to developed countries, could organize a Third World Festival. But somehow, through the creativity of the people involved, young people contributed their time. We got hotels giving in rooms for free for exchange of advertisements. We got airline tickets by having our artists teach in the Philippine Airlines to their employees and give creative drama sessions. The festival was held, and it set a precedent. And now the festival is a regular feature of the UNESCO International Theatre Institute. And then the UNESCO Director General and the Secretary General of the International Theatre Institute finally sent in their messages and hailed the festival. And I will quote, "It is more and better than any other festival throughout the world. It is an act of fate of the theatre people of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, whose presence is absolutely necessary for the world, as much for the future of our theatre as for indispensable peace." Working with the Third World Committee of the International Theatre Institute, we felt the need to involve ethnic minorities within developed countries, such as in the US or in Australia, the Aborigines, or the Maoris in New Zealand. And I was unable to leave with travel restrictions, but I had decided anyway to leave because I felt that the international programs that PETA had started had to be continued, and there was enough talent and energy in the country to sustain our national programs. And so I left in exile to carry on some of our programs, which then developed into a Third World Institute of Theatre Art Studies, where we could have a consistent laboratory for the research, training, production, and documentation of the artistic treasures of the Third World, and to develop cross-cultural fertilization and basis for inspiration for ethnic minority artistic expressions here in America. Some of the productions, for instance, that were being done were with multinational participants. For instance, like working on the Ramayana, an Indian epic, we did not limit it to just an Indian expression or an Indonesian expression or a Malaysian expression. It had a third world cast. Sita was Indian. She was using Bharatnatyam traditions. We had Rama and Lakshmana from the Afro-Caribbean traditions by having some Dominican Republic. We had a Malaysian doing the golden deer. with a Filipino artist doing the Sister of Ravana. We had a Chinese with a Paping opera tradition doing Hanuman, and it was a whole synthesis and a celebration of various artistic traditions in staging one particular tradition from a given country. Another experiment we did, for instance, was a third world liturgy. We utilized 15 different religious traditions: Buddhism, Shango, Judaism, Islam. Using the framework of the Mass, we interwove all of these various artistic traditions and built it up so that it was organized for the intention of the rights of the child. Now, this was the kind of work that the Third World Institute was doing. At the same time, it was trying to encourage various ethnic groups to cultivate and develop their own cultural presentations to serve their own respective communities. And thus, from the Philippine point of view, we also organized our own ethnic community, Filipino-American group, which also served as a coordinating secretariat in launching the movement which we had called FAITH, Folk Arts for Communication and Education, which we were relating to the United Nations development concerns. We had always felt that the artistic resources and expertise in a given country was not really harnessed or recognized by government leaders as crucial to facilitating development programs. And so in 1974, at the World Population Conference, we were able to hold a parallel cultural activity of FAITH so that we could demonstrate to this conference of government leaders that artists could expound on the issues that they were discussing and translate it in cultural symbols that the people could easily relate and understand, rather than having reams and reams of paper being produced in the Secretariat of the UN, which hardly trickled down to the grassroots. We felt that communications and motivation and mobilization could be facilitated if they were transformed, if they were couched in these indigenous cultural symbols of the people that we were trying to reach. And so we proceeded to the Women's Conference in Mexico, and again to the Human Settlements Conference, and we felt that we made a major breakthrough during the International Year of the Child, because here we were able to gather a number of artists to train them as leaders to use folk arts in the classroom and in production, and to build a pilot third world arts curriculum that we could introduce to children. We tested this for children of Head Start ages, 3 to 5, with gifted children, with retarded children, with juvenile delinquents in Spofford. And the effect was incredible, because here were children, ordinarily, who would have no relationship with these other cultures, with these other peoples, being very early on acquainted with this heritage, given some kind of understanding of other peoples, which inevitably really, again, we're going to the topic of an investment into peace, because it thus really reduces racial estrangement when people very early on are exposed and appreciate other people's cultures and get to learn about people through their artistic expressions. And